3 Americans had tuberculosis 100 years ago. And a lot of that went to people's spines. So here's Louis Sayre. He's the first orthopedic professor in American history in New York City at Bellevue. This stood for treatment of scoliosis back then, where you'd take the patient's arms. A lot of people had scoliosis because the tuberculosis had gone to their spine. The symbol we have for orthopedics of the crooked tree and the stake is because of Pott's disease, tuberculosis to the spine. So he would suspend them and put a plaster brace on. And of course, this is in the 1870s, no such thing as x-rays. X-rays were invented in 1895. Can you imagine trying to be a scoliosis doctor with no x-rays? You can't see. You can just palpate. First x-ray, again, this was Röntgen's x-ray of his wife's hand, 1895. Finally, we get to the 1930s, sulfas in 36, penicillin in 41, modern medical alloys in the 30s, outcomes trials in the 30s, and importantly, polymers, transistors, and bone cement in the 50s. So all told, I call that the implant revolution. Everything you need to make an implant came about in this 10 to 15 year time period. So Marius Smith Peterson. So this guy's at Harvard, and he realized, I'm interested in treating these really painful hips. And he had this idea, well, what if we took this little metal cup, opened someone up, and again, this is super brave, no such thing as antibiotics. I'm going to put a little metal cup on someone's femoral head, and we'll leave it in there for a little bit. This is one of my favorite pictures of the evening. It might be my favorite one, because the very first guy to have an implant to go down the bone and replace what a femoral head would be like was McBride. This is the guy. The first person in the world, and it was done in Oklahoma City, right there. Major shout out, especially if you're a member of the McBride Hospital. It's a really big deal. There are all these guys in New York and Boston and Philly. They didn't believe Earl McBride. He took his patient to the annual American Orthopedic Association meeting in New York City at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, and he brought her and made her walk in front and said, these are your x-rays. No, it can't be. Ma'am, are these your x-rays? Yes. Look at her walk. Look how amazing she's doing. And everyone scrambled, and that was the birth of total hip replacement. Earl McBride, OKC. So the implant revolution happened because you had these modern alloys. Modern alloys were invented a little bit in New York City, but tested for the first time by a guy in San Antonio. And that's a point I make in my book over and over and over again. Most of the modern advances that happened in surgery were not in New York or London. They were in little places like San Antonio, Wrightington, England, Oklahoma City, not the highfalutin places. It was by hardworking, lone geniuses like Isaac Newton, who were thinking and were doggedly determined to make the future. Modern alloys, penicillin, and all the antibiotics from 41 to 47 were invented by digging up stuff out of the ground. Transistors were also invented. That was an American invention because of World War II. Bell Labs in Jersey. And polymers, plastics. All those things were invented in short order, 10 or 15 years. And of course, that's everything it takes. Payon is the guy, but here's the second Oklahoma guy I want to celebrate, Charlie Neer, the father of shoulder surgery. He passed away 7 years ago at the age 95. Charlie Neer had served as a young medical doctor. He was D-Day plus 6 days. He went ashore on one of these boats. Charlie Neer moved to New York in 45, finished his residency in 49. And I would say his story, I have about 5 slides here. There's some detail here. If you're not an orthopedic surgeon, you may think, Schneider, take it easy. But this will highlight why things have changed so dramatically from then till now. He became interested in fracture care. So his first paper was on hip fractures. And he ended up saying this. And when I was a resident at the New York Orthopedic Hospital, the only procedures used to treat problems of the shoulder joint were either fusion or resection. We did it for tuberculosis infection. And I became interested in these bad injuries. And I thought, I'm going to make a study, and I'm going to look at how people do. Back then, that meant grueling hard work to make it happen. So what was state of the art? This is when Charlie Neer was a resident. So the Steindler book, this was the first book on diseases and disabilities of the upper extremity. So O'Donoghue, of course, the American father of sports medicine, also here in Oklahoma City. Every orthopedic surgeon in the world knows about O'Donoghue. Many may not know he's from Oklahoma City. He's the guy that had the first sports medicine textbook. Steindler, this was his entire write-up on how to treat a fracture. This is it. This is all you got. Make an incision, expose it, and take it out. The end. Who thinks that works well? No. And especially if you've had the surgery, you can't raise your hand because you're like, I don't think it works very well. De Palma, who had the second shoulder textbook, he said it. It's unavoidable. What you have to do is just take it out. It's just good range of motion, and that's what qualified for an outcome study back then. Charlie Neer, what he did with those two awful textbooks at his disposal, looked back 23 years from the day that Columbia opened, and he went down to the basement of the hospital, looked in these logbooks, turning page by page, everything written by hand, and found almost 1,800 shoulder trauma patients, 784 shoulder dislocations, looked at all the data and said, of all those, 20 patients had a fracture and a dislocation. Now, in my weird practice, I see this basically every day. We run a very busy level 1 trauma center. And then he wrote it up. This is one of the most classic shoulder papers ever. This is one of the most quoted orthopedic articles in history. And what he found is that people do awful. They don't do well. It's not satisfactory. Their motion is terrible. 1,600 incision. And he said there was usually 5 to 25 degrees of motion. 5 to 25, not 170. Basically nothing. He said, you guys, why are we doing this? This is awful. There has to be a better way. We're not going to stand for this. And at the very end of his paper, he just throws us out. We're currently investigating this little device. Replacement prosthesis presents a logical possibility and may prove of value in dealing with major injuries of the humeral head. Its true worth remains to be determined. Again, he's at the precipice of the implant revolution. He's one of the pioneers that said, you know what? We shouldn't put up with horrible shoulder fractures. Here's a picture of me holding the implant. This is the original one. This is it. This is what he invented. And of course, there was no such thing as FDA approval for an implant back then. You just made it and put it in the next day. You really did. You really did. And here's Charlie Neer. But there it is. That's what it looked like in his next paper. And again, he is part of that third wave, the third industrial revolution. Because now manufacturing is good enough that you can actually do something